Dzień dobry. I am a child of Poland. My mother's mother was born about 100 kilometers to the southwest in Gryc. My mother's father was born about 250 kilometers to the southeast in Grodzisk. And I am thrilled to be right here in my father's home birthplace of Grodzisk Mazowiecki. My grandfather, Gritz, was a respected leader of the community who helped settle disagreements about Jewish law. When Noyev was a very young man, so young that he could not grow a beard, the Grodzisk Rebbe sent Noyev to Warsaw to argue a legal case before the Beis Din, the House of Judgment, the Jewish rabbinical court. At first, the gray-bearded elders of the Beis Din were insulted that the Grodzisk Rebbe had sent such a young man to argue a case before them. But when Noyev began to speak, they were impressed by his well-reasoned arguments, and Noyev won the case. My grandmother, Tova Netha Wencel, had a hard life. Her mother Liba, for whom I am named, died when Tova was very young. Tova married Noyev Gritz, and they had a difficult relationship with very different personalities and priorities. But they stayed together, had 3 sons, and emigrated to New York in 1937. Sadly, their youngest son Moshe died of a ruptured appendix when he was 3 years old, shortly after they arrived in America. For the rest of her life, Tova lamented that they should never have left Poland. As a child, I remember thinking how foolish that was, since almost all of her family members who stayed in Poland were killed in the Holocaust. Today, I wonder whether that was the point, that she wanted to join her family in ashes and dust. After the war, Noyev worked hard to find survivors, serving as the secretary of the Relief Committee of the Grodzisk Mutual Aid Society in New York. He found no Gritz or Wencel survivors, but he found other survivors from Grodzisk and helped arrange for them to emigrate to the U.S. Grandpa Noyev learned a chilling story about himself from a survivor named Wiener. When the Nazis invaded Grodzisk, they arrested the leaders of the Jewish community. One of the names on their list was Noyev Gritz. The Nazis did not believe that he had emigrated and warned that if Noyev Gritz did not appear before them, they would deport 25 young men. It was impossible for Noyev to appear, and the Nazis carried out their action. Wiener was one of those 25 young men, and he was the only one who survived. This tragic story ends with a bit of poetic justice, with Noyev helping to find Wiener after the war and bring him to the United States. When I was a little girl, Grandpa Noyev taught me a song to welcome Shabbos, the Jewish Sabbath, and took me to synagogue for Saturday services. Even though women had to sit separately from the men, I was young enough to sit with him. I was fascinated by the melodies and rhythms, with everyone chanting at their own pace and then suddenly coming together in unison, then their voices separating and then joining together again. Grandpa Noyev told great stories, jokes, and riddles, all in Yiddish, which I did not understand. As an adult, I studied Yiddish, and I wish I could have spoken with my grandfather in his native language. My wonderful husband, Mike, and I raised our 2 children in Yiddish, and I am very happy that they verbunden mit Amerikaner Fußball, gedient wie Soldaten der Milchome. Als schöne Weib hat genommen, Kinder sei schon bald gekommen, starke Liebe behalten in der Mischome. Hat getanzt durch Simches mit der Mamen, walzen wie Foxtrot und Hapsocke. In der Heim tanzen, singen, hocken, drehen, spinnen, springen, drehen, freien mit dem Kartenstocke. Musik Tag und Nacht durch den Radio, Mozart, Beethoven, Verdi. Und von der Manuel Freitag singt Rosenstein und geistig Schabes, bei Nacht auf der Party. Der Tate ist weg schon lange Jahren, ins Kinder gedeihen alles. Es bin vieles Wissenschafters, weil es in Gestärkungssport ist, Vater, Wortgeschäft, als euch für Naches. Kinder, guten Teile, Bäuer, nach Garteneier. Vater, Wortgeschäft, als euch für Naches.
It's your turn.
Dzień dobry. My name is David Gritz. I'm the grandson of Noah Gritz and Toba Wencel. It is an honor and a privilege to be here today. The Wencel and Gritz families were interwoven in many ways, not just in their origins from Grodzisk. A Wencel brother and sister married a Gritz sister and brother, further cementing the bond between these two families. It was Hyman Wencel who married Anna Gritz. It was Noah Gritz who married Toba Wencel, who became my eventual paternal grandparents. After attempting to emigrate illegally in the early 1920s and deported, Noah was able to emigrate in 1937 with his wife and 3 sons, Herman, my father, Seymour, and Moshe, who died tragically less than a year after they arrived, and whose name I was given as my middle name. Many from both families became successful businessmen and entrepreneurs in New York City. Hyman Wencel opened a dressmaking factory. Max Wencel owned a clothing business, and whose granddaughter Andrea is here with us today. Max Gritz opened a bakery, equally known for the pinochle card games played amongst the Gritz brothers. The yelling and screaming from these games probably scared off more than one customer. My grandfather had little interest in business, devoting himself to religious studies beginning here in Grodzisk. He was a brilliant Talmudic scholar, the gabbai in his synagogue in New York City. One story has it that when he took ill and was hospitalized in a Catholic hospital, an Irish Catholic priest came along to offer communion. Obviously, my grandfather did not partake. However, they proceeded to have a biblical discussion. My grandfather in his broken English, the Irish priest with a thick Irish brogue. How they understood each other, we'll never know. My grandfather was an active member of the Grodzisk Mutual Aid Society, devoted to helping refugees resettle. I have early childhood memories of attending meetings of the society with my parents. One of my favorite stories about my grandfather was about his service in the Polish Army during World War I. He was wounded and was recovering in an army hospital. He was observing a chess match between the commandant of the hospital and another officer. The commandant suddenly resigned from the game, saying he could not win. My grandfather said, "No, you can win." The commandant said, "You, Jew, you sit here and take my position," which my grandfather did. He won the game, at which time the commandant said to him, "You will spend the rest of the war teaching me how to play chess." And that's what he did. I always enjoyed a special relationship with my grandfather. At 5 years old, I was hospitalized for approximately 3 weeks. During that time, he constantly came to visit me. He taught me the card game Casino, which involved simple mathematics. By the time I returned to school later that year, I was way ahead of my class in addition and subtraction. Years later, as I approached my 13th birthday, it was he who taught me my bar mitzvah lessons. How appropriate was it that my reading was from the book of Noah? Growing up, he always challenged us with brain teaser jokes for entertainment and teaching us how to think. Now that I myself am a grandparent, I do the same with my grandchildren. My father was obsessed with the freedom that the United States offered, compared with his early years in Poland. At the age of 10, he sailed into New York Harbor. He would never forget the sight of the Statue of Liberty and the lights of New York City welcoming him. Despite living through the unrest of his early years, there was some pride in his Polish origins, as whenever the Gryc football team would visit New York City, we'd always go watch them play. My father was determined to put the difficult times of his childhood behind him and take advantage of the educational opportunities offered in the United States. After serving in the Army in Japan during World War II, he returned home to work full-time and attend New York University in the evening, earning his degree in the usual time of 4 years. With the example he set, neither my sister nor I had any excuses for poor schoolwork. I use this example with my own 2 children as well. He became an accountant and eventually ended up managing the United States subsidiary of a British clothing importer. He was an avid sportsman, loved football, and was an outstanding tennis player. One year, he was close to qualifying for the US Open in tennis in mixed doubles. I followed in his footsteps in many ways. I became a chartered accountant and shared his love of sports, competing in senior level competitions in athletics to this very day. My father and his generation of Wencel cousins all grew up in the same area in New York City and were more like an extended family of brothers and sisters than cousins. As they reached adulthood, they formed a cousins club, getting together regularly and even traveled to Israel to visit Aunt Anna, who had settled there years earlier with Uncle Jaime to seek treatment for his Parkinson's disease. Aunt Anna was the last of her generation by then, well into her 80s. But she was always the epitome of style. She hosted over 20 of her nieces and nephews, coiffed, dressed impeccably, complete with high-heeled shoes. I do regret that my generation never continued the Cousins Club concept. It is only recently that I met Andrea. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here today to speak of the generations that preceded us. And on behalf of those who came before us and my soon-to-be 95-year-old mother at home, dziękuję.
When I was about 10 years old, our great aunt Anna made a trip to Grodzisk. You may hear more about her in all the family stories that are being told. Anna was a dynamic and enchanting person, as David remembers her as well. I always remember her vibrant clothes and jewelry, and the fact that she always had something to say. I asked about her Grodzisk trip, and she was very sad and told me not to go, as nothing Jewish was left to see. But I've always loved stories, and managing to get here so many years after Anna's visit is really a wonderful surprise, and it's very exciting to see such a lovely little city. So I want to give a big thanks to Peter and Joanna for all their work on this project, when I thought there really wasn't much to find. And another thanks to Cousin Linda for her multilingual research that brings back so much history of the Jewish world that once thrived here. Linda and Dave and I represent the Wencel, Wiener, Gritz generations born in the United States. Linda and Dave's grandfather was one of 24 siblings, a great friend and brother-in-law of my grandfather, who was one of 19 or 17, not sure. Linda and Dave's grandfather married my grandfather's sister with another 2 siblings, making another Gritz Wencel family that firmly glued the families together during their first years in the U.S. I am grateful that today people can see my grandfather Max as the important person I always believed him to be. I loved and depended on him, and I'm hugely grateful that he wrote essays about life in Grodzisk that still exist today. The years after World War II were a time when Jews mostly kept silent about their history. It was too painful, and the knowledge of the struggles was believed to be detrimental to the younger generations, but I still wanted to know. My grandfather spoke to me when and how he could about his history, his dreams, and his daily life. He was also an excellent shaggy dog joke teller. A shaggy dog joke is one that goes on and on, telling a story where you think the storyteller is bored. In Max's case, he would pretend to be a boring old man, out of touch with reality. But finally, there would be an insightful joke you just couldn't ignore. I spent my college spring vacations in Florida staying with Max and Sarah. For spring vacations, Max would always invite the boys there on spring break to dinner at his home. Large, multi-course meals were cooked and served by his new devoted wife, Sarah, who he married after my grandmother died, who was one of the Jews Max helped lived in hiding in Germany during World War II. The invited boys stayed in cheap motels, 4 to 6 in a room, and needed a good meal. Max would sit at the head of the table, and after interviewing each boy, would tell a shaggy dog story and watch the boys look bored through the telling until he hit them with a joke. The story was told while Max very slowly and carefully peeled an apple, with the skin remaining in one long piece, leaving the center for his dessert. It was a performance I greatly enjoyed. It is deeply meaningful to add to those memories the essays that Max wrote for the Grodzisk Mutual Aid Society's yearbooks that remain in safekeeping even today. Cousin Linda has unearthed and sometimes translated my grandfather's essays from Yiddish. It is helping me understanding the meaning of Grodzisk while I experience it as it is today. This is the part of the world I should know about but never thought I would know. I'm also happy to bring some of my own research to this festival. My synagogue project illustrates European Jewish history through paintings of the buildings that were central to the Jewish communities throughout generations. The synagogues I paint are from all over Europe, and all were destroyed by Nazis and related parties. I work from archival material to paint 85 synagogues from 15 countries, described by the political landscape of 1936. 77 of the synagogues with 50,000 words describing each community will be published by the University of Nebraska Press and Jewish Publication Society on November 1st, 2025. So if the part of the synagogues representing Poland are actually on display in the library, and we can talk about them later. So I just want to end by saying again, thanks to everyone who put time into this festival. It's really amazing to be here, and it's hard to explain. We talk about it, together, and it's just hard to explain how amazing it is to be here. So thanks to everyone who's